Okay, welcome everybody. The Future of Legal Tech 2026 webinar. I'm lucky to be joined here by Nathan Walter, founder of Briefpoint. My name is Josh Schmerling, co-founder of LawPro.ai and a practicing personal injury attorney at Zirkin and Schmerling Law. Nathan, could you take us through kind of your background and background about Briefpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here. My name's Nathan Walter, CEO, co-founder of Briefpoint. I started Briefpoint after practicing litigation for 5 years because I felt that discovery was something that shouldn't exist. So it hurts clients and it's the worst part of my job. I like doing the interesting things. So I set out to build a company to eliminate discovery, and that's what Briefpoint does.
Great. And how about a little bit about your background? I know you weren't new to the legal industry, right? So can you give us a little bit more about your legal background?
Yeah, so I practice at in Southern California. I did aviation and aerospace litigation for a little bit, which is mostly FAA regulatory stuff. And then I did sort of large construction contract litigation. And through that, just having dealt with so many clients where they had to settle their cases just because the litigation budget was destroyed by discovery, sort of decided something to do about it.
Awesome. That's great. And as a practicing attorney myself, I've seen Briefpoint. It's really incredible what it can do, and we'll get into that throughout the conversation here today. Obviously, we're not trying to do any hard pitches here. We're talking about the legal industry, but of course, Briefpoint's an amazing tool, and you'll talk about that some. You know, my background is I'm a personal injury lawyer, have been for the last 18 years. Started Law Pro as a needed thing for my law firm. My law firm had kind of stopped growing, stopped scaling a couple of years ago. And the big issue we were having was how do we get through all the medical records and understand what's in the medical records quick enough that we can move the cases along faster. So as we grew, we eventually weren't able to keep growing because the medical records were holding us back. And so as a need, I co-founded LawPro.ai for my law firm. And our law firm has now grown by, leaps and bounds, between 3 and 4x in the last couple of years. And LawPro is growing tremendously, signing up new law firms every week for the same pain point that I was having in terms of how to understand and deal with the medical records, in terms of what's in them, how to deal with the case, what's the best way to move forward with the case, whether it's pre-litigation settlement or take the case to litigation. And we help with all of that, and we also help to make sure you have the documents you need and value the cases the proper way. So that's a little bit of background about myself and LawPro. And today what I'd like to get into with you, Nathan, is we did one of our customers, Morgan & Morgan, we did a survey with them with over 300 law firms throughout the country, primarily personal injury law firms throughout the country, to get the take of where is the market right now with legal tech, specifically with AI. As I'm sure you've seen, being in the legal space for quite a while, the legal market has never been like this before, where there's all kinds of vendors coming out every week with new technology, claiming to do more things. Some of them actually probably do help law firms. Some of them probably are just some techie that decided to get in legal tech last minute. And so I want to kind of get into what the firms that we surveyed are talking about in terms of legal tech and AI, and kind of your thoughts about that as well. So let's start with AI adoption in general. And what we saw from speaking to firms throughout the country is that really 92% of firms have at least started engaging in some way with AI. And I'd like to get your take on that. I mean, what are your thoughts about that 92% of firms are reporting at least some engagement with AI?
Yeah, I mean, this is the sort of the second AI boom in law, and the first one was TAR back in the 2000s with the technology assisted review for e-discovery, but that was just kind of boring. And this AI wave has a lot more teeth. To your point, when I started Briefpoint in the legal tech, there was like 50 legal tech companies. There's now, I think, over 1,300 if you look at legal tech hubs, their map. We're seeing an explosion in growth. We're seeing tons of VC money pouring into legal tech specifically. And with that, you have really robust go-to-market strategies where you have people, banging on law firm doors and getting people excited. And attorneys are finally able to use really advanced technology in a way that's never been more accessible. Because I don't know if you played around with legal tech in 2018 and before, it looked horrible. They were all basically they look like Minesweeper UIs. And now it's just way more sophisticated. It's way easier to use, and the value is way more apparent. The problem with that is that now we have massive platform fatigue where a lot of people are going to have 10 tabs open. They have a solution for X and a solution for Y. And the people that promise to do everything, they do everything to some degree, and they're competing with out of the box LLMs. It's there's a lot, and I think that we're definitely feeling a lot of AI fatigue in the market just from all of the messaging and stuff. So I think it's helpful to really focus on specific use cases, and when you focus on small or addressable pain points with AI, that's where you're going to see the return. That's where you're going to see a lot less of that fatigue, because if you have an AI try to do something huge like a giant motion or entire trial prep stuff, it's not, there's going to be some problems with it. But if you apply AI really intentionally to smaller tasks initially, you're going to get a lot of value. And I think that value is what speaks to the 92% of adoption that we're seeing, which is absolutely unheard of in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I'll just add on a couple of things there that I think number one, you have some systems out there to claim that they do it all. We can do everything for you from intake to resolution. And at least my experience has been looking at some of those systems that they're kind of half baked, right? It's like, oh, we want to be able to market that we do everything, but can they actually do it and do it well? And I have not seen something that can do everything well and follow all the ethical practices that need to be followed and everything else that you have to take a look at. So that's one thing that's always a concern to me when I hear that. The other thing, and we're going to touch on this some more later, and I think it's a great point that you made, is that specific AI tools are easier and better implemented within a law firm practice than a general tool. And so if you have one specific technology tool to help you with discovery, for example, or understanding medical records or negotiating with insurance companies, that tool can be implemented with your law firm. Your law firm can understand, your employees can understand, all right, this is how we use the tool, this is when we use the tool. But I've seen a lot of times firms try to put in a general tool that's apparently a do it all, and it becomes a disaster because no one exactly knows when or how or why they should use the tool. And then there's also issues with that tool. Have you seen that also?
Yeah, there's two sides of the coin. On one side of the coin is just the acknowledgement that, AI is not perfect. And I don't think anyone should look at a result that AI gives you on the first pass, and if it's not perfect, you walk away. That's not how we handle associates at our firm. If you're an associate and if you have an associate and the associate makes a mistake, you're expecting associates to make mistakes. All associates have made mistakes. You address them. And like the reason associates stick around is not because they've never made a mistake, it's because they can recover from these mistakes. So I think that we need to give AI a little bit of like empathy in that regard, within reason. And then the other side of the coin is, okay, if you're trying to do everything all at once, you're going to be at a disadvantage because you lack the focus that's required. And when you go across these workflows, across litigation, there's really a ton of depth in almost every litigation workflow. Even templates have preferences between attorneys and nuance that a horizontal solution is likely going to not be able to capture. Whereas if you do these pointed solutions or a pointed solution for X and Y, that is going to go a lot deeper in resolving the pain point. And the difference between solving the pain point 100% and solving it 60% is massive. Because when you have a solution that only solves things less than 100% or even a fraction of that, what's actually happening is that you're taking on new pain points that you didn't have before. So there's this concept of pain point elimination and then pain point diversification. And learning how to prompt and wrangling with formatting and doing all these other things to force a triangle AI horizontal solution into the square hole that is your practice is going to cause a lot of friction. You can get used to it, but ultimately what we find with these horizontal solutions is that attorneys will pick like a couple of things to use it for, and then they're not going to use the rest of the bells and whistles, even though they're paying for it. Whereas with the point solutions, you can sort of choose ahead of time which things you want to solve, and then those can be solved in their totality. And you know that that provider is only going to get better at that solution. Like the provider is not going to say, hey, I know we do medical records, but we're going to stop production on medical record retrieval and analysis in order to focus on contract analysis, like for contract attorneys, right? So that is another benefit that you can get. And it does just point to the fact that the goal of AI is to make our lives easier, not more annoying. So you should think about that. And when you're using these platforms, be sure to take note of the things that you have to do because of the platform that you didn't have to do before.
Yeah, and I'll just note on that, usually, at least what I've seen, and I'd love to get your thought on that, is typically what I've seen is the specific point solution to fix whatever your pain point is, right? We can all agree that AI is not magical, right? You still have to have processes and procedures, and you have to have a specific pain point you want to get fixed. And the tools that fix those specific pain points typically are a lot less expensive than a magical tool that generally tries to do it all. Have you seen that same thing?
Well, I mean, they're going to need to be, right? If you're a point solution, you need to exist, and like you have to price yourself appropriately. And then, yeah, these horizontal solutions, they are more expensive. And this goes down to an issue or a calculation that everyone needs to be asking themselves before they onboard any vendor. And that is, does the utility you get from an out-of-the-box ChatGPT or Claude, is that utility enough? Is there a gap between that utility and the provider's utility? Is the delta in utility enough to warrant the delta in price? So this is a story. There was a PI firm in Atlanta, a larger one. I think they had 300 attorneys or so. And they had co-counsel by Thomson Reuters, and they had their team use ChatGPT. And I asked about adoption, and they said, well, it's, about half the people use co-counsel, half the people use ChatGPT. It comes down to preference. And so these really expensive solutions that are doing everything really need to look in the mirror and ask themselves, if our cost comes down to preference, is this a long-term play? Like, how much do simple preferential sort of ask components of a product carry the price of these products, and the difference between the price of an enterprise rollout and a $200 a month ChatGPT license? And that's a calculation I think everyone should consider. Okay, what types of things makes this better than what can I get out of a ChatGPT? Because ChatGPT is now sort of the baseline. And Claude, I'm going to say Claude, Gemini, Chat. I'm just going to call it ChatGPT. It's all sort of the same thing, right? There are things to look at for that. There's moats, right? And so when you're evaluating how to measure the value a tool provides beyond a chat interface, there's 4 core moats, the way I see it. The one, if I may, there's the legal repository moat, where you have the research data. Like, what was yesterday's ruling? While ChatGPT can probably accurately cite a lot of statutes and set case law, they certainly don't have access to the court repositories that Clio, via their VLEX acquisition, Thomson Reuters, Westlaw, Lexis, and Unicourt have. Like, they don't. Those companies are doing things that ChatGPT can't, and those are the 4 companies that have that moat. The second moat is institutional data, where it is the practices of a firm. It is, what is the alleged reason Cravath is able to charge more than another, like, less prestigious firm. It's the assumption that these firms have a lot of experience in a specialized area. They've seen these cases before, and they know how to handle it, either whether that's with this specific client, this type of judge, that kind of non-memorialized data that allows them to be proficient is institutional data. And so those 2 things are like the biggest moats. And then moving out from that, we have large repository data. So while we certainly have these large token context windows where an AI can handle 1 million tokens, which is thousands and thousands of pages, performance really drops off after a certain amount of tokens, even if you can technically process it. So processing large amounts of data and getting reliable results from that data is something that chatbots and AI really is not great at handling now, because number one, there's a lot for it to process, so it's hard for it to piece through. And number 2, when it gives you results, it's almost certainly missing things that you would have to figure out on your own by just reading everything. The point of the verification sort of thesis, which is any tool that you use for AI, it must take you less time to verify those results than it would have taken you to just do the thing yourself the first time. So again, pointing to point solutions. I know we're beating this, dead horse a little bit, but those point solutions, they can actually implement those verification protocols and those verification procedures to make verification less of a lift. The last two softer modes are client interactions and client portals, where you have a communication vehicle that chatbots are not going to be able to facilitate reliably. And then finally, you have systems of record, where you can have a one repository for your entire team to go to see, oh, what are the medical records that are the key components of this case? You can have somebody go in and they can have a living record of your work in one place. Those are the types of things you should look for in a vendor in order to determine whether their cost justifies or fills the utility delta between chat and the services they provide.
Yeah, that was a great explanation. Thanks for providing all that information. It's interesting. I travel all around the country just like you do, going to different seminars and speaking at different things. And for a while, people were saying to me, well, why can't I just put my medical records into large language models, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, whatever it is, and getting all the data that LawPro is pulling out? And there's ethical issues about that I'm going to get into in a moment. But I decided to test it myself. And so I created fictitious medical records, and I put a small amount to ChatGPT, because if you put in 1,000 pages, you're going to get timed out, tokened out, whatever it is. With specific tools like a LawPro tool, you can put as many pages or files in as you want. But I just used a small amount. I put in 20 pages or something, and I asked it for all the different types of diagnosis and visits and treatments and diagnostics that were done. I said, give me a listing with dates and what was done for each date. And I did, and I looked at the same thing with LawPro. And I happened to use ChatGPT when I did this, and it showed about half the dates of what LawPro pulled. Because LawPro, we pull event types. We're trained to pull event types of every medical record over and over again. We do it with millions of pages every day. ChatGPT is an amazing tool, obviously, but this isn't the point solution for it necessarily. And so it missed about half the dates. And I show this to people when I go speak at seminars, because I think it's really telling. Like, this is why ChatGPT can't do the same thing as the LawPro, because it's an amazing solution for a lot of things, but it doesn't get that in depth of what we're talking about. It's not trained to do this with millions of pages of records. So I think that's one important point. The other important point, which I get from people all the time, is, oh yeah, and I don't hear this as much anymore, but for a long time I was hearing it, is I just put my clients' medical records into a large language model and ask questions. So not only will the large language model probably miss things like I just mentioned, there's ethical issues with that. These large language models often are not HIPAA compliant. They don't have SOC 2, and so you're putting your client's information in there with something that is not HIPAA compliant now. You have ethical issues. You have your bar license on the line. And that's something people really need to be cautious about. And for a while, I think it was kind of running like the Wild Wild West, where people forgot that. And there was even a case, I think, that came out recently where a judge said, that you broke confidentiality by putting specific information about your clients, with his name and information into a large language model. And so, but, any additional thoughts you have about that?
Yeah, I mean, there was Anthropic, which is the company that owns Claude, had a webinar, I think last week, last week, and they, or maybe it's like a month ago. I actually forgot. Time moves in different paces when you're in legal tech. It could have been a month ago. It could have been a year ago. I honestly have no idea. Anyways, they had a webinar, and this is a big question for law and like lawyers in general. The real sticking point is if you go into Claude or like your ChatGPT and you look at it, you say, okay, don't store my data, don't learn from the AI, right? You do that, but then there's a provision in there that says like we use anonymized data from your chats to learn how people use the product, right? And anonymized is not defined on that page. And it's not really clear how they're anonymizing this data, because there's a very wide spectrum of anonymization of data, ranging from changing a name from John to Bon and then having that just a Control F replace. but then in order to find John, you still need to have the word John. So is that really nice? All the way to like encryption, where we're actually converting everything into like, symbols and letters, and you have like a key to unlock it. It's not, I don't think that they're encrypting this stuff. So it's somewhere in between. And where that lies has a really big impact on your ethical duties. And then the reason I brought the webinar was because Anthropic was asked, hey, how do you maintain attorney-client privilege? And they said, they said, we don't have access to anything you didn't already have access to. That's not a satisfactory response. I'm not even sure what that means, because you certainly have access to privileged information. So I don't know. I think that the jury's still out. There was one case that happened a while ago where a CEO got caught, basically the judge found that him using ChatGPT wasn't privileged. The headlines were a little bit misleading. It made it appear like there was a waiver of privilege from engaging in, like, an attorney engaging in a chat system, but the ruling was actually rather mundane. It was just saying this CEO was asking for legal advice from ChatGPT. ChatGPT is not an attorney. Therefore, any communication with an attorney is not privileged. Therefore, this is not privileged. And so that chat log was discoverable, which is another thing that attorneys need to be aware of, is that, is this work product? Are you waiving work product? We're at a moment of inflection in the industry, which is very similar to where we were with the advent of email, where when email first came out, people were saying, well, aren't we waiving privilege by giving this literally privileged communication to Microsoft? And then, eventually we matured and we created things. The difference between that and this is that email was a method of communication with the client. It was the vehicle of communication. Whereas in this situation, if you're giving privileged information to ChatGPT, it's not sort of facilitating that communication. It's not clear. And in order to get to that zero data retention out of the box with Claude or ChatGPT, you have to spend a lot of money to get the enterprise version, where vendors have the benefit of having that enterprise product already. Therefore, they can facilitate that zero data retention, whereas it's much more expensive to do so just using a chat interface.
Yeah, I think all really important information that you just went through. I also want to talk about, we talked about the 92%. I want to talk about the 8% for a second. The 8% of law firms saying they're not engaging with AI or legal tech really at all. And I find that number, it's not a huge number. I mean, the technology is growing fast here and people are adopting it at record paces. I just try to think about, what's that 8% thinking? Are they thinking that they're never going to have to use AI to help support their law firm? It's interesting. When we first went to market, LawPro first went to market, which was about 2 years ago, I was getting pushback from firms 2 years ago saying, we've never needed AI before. We're not going to use AI now. Our firm doesn't need it. And what I would try to explain to law firms back then, 2 years ago, which doesn't sound that long, but like in legal tech, it's really long. And what I would try to explain to them is, this is like when you went from a typewriter to a PC. There's no way a law firm could exist continuing on a typewriter. You had to make the move to a PC. And I would try to explain that. That was 2 years ago. Now, when I go to conferences, I speak to law firms, I don't get that pushback at all. Every law firm I speak to says, yes, we need it. We know we need to implement something. We need, to fix a pain point. So I'm trying to figure out, what's this 8% still left? Are they either, firms that are too small, they can't afford the budget, they're not looking to grow and scale? What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I want to start from a place of sympathy, just because I understand why an attorney wouldn't not want to change the way they practice for any reason. And that's just because, as a litigation attorney, it's kind of hard to become a good litigation attorney. Like, you really need to work really hard. And that effort, a lot of that effort is building a very specific method of practice where you do things a certain way, your support staff is trained in that way, and your entire firm is aligned for this machine with these type gears. And when you say, okay, let's adopt AI, and that AI requires you to change the way things work, it's not as easy as you think, oh, well, just use AI. Well, when you have a hierarchy of staff and a long history of a very specific workflow that has worked, like you're a successful attorney because of this workflow, it's not easy to untie that. It's not easy to just revert that. And I totally understand the hesitation. Um, I think that's probably the core reason is people that are saying, hey, I've been practicing for X amount of years. It works fine. If it's not broken, don't fix it. I totally understand that. Unfortunately, and unlike the typewriter to computer, we are facing a larger existential threat to law firms generally by way of institutional venture capital money flowing in to law firms. And that can be from MSOs, where a venture firm will buy all of the back office expenses and then share in the profits of the firm to get around the attorney share prohibitions for non-attorneys. And then there are these new startups, these new AI startups that are effectively masquerading as law firms. So Y Combinator is the Harvard of accelerators. Accelerator is a organization that takes a startup when it's very young, invests in it, and then makes it go and makes it scale quickly. YC is the best at it. They stopped investing in straight up legal tech companies that are selling to attorneys. Now they're investing, and they're in their new cohort of class and companies in Y Combinator. They're now investing in AI companies that are competing with attorneys. And we're going to see something very, very weird happen here because we have more institutional money going into law firm services than ever before. And Silicon Valley is really good at customer acquisition and go to market. There is literally no one better than these class of people. And that is someone we're going to be competing with now. And so your ability to not use AI, or sorry, your choice to not use AI and your ability to survive while not using it is going to shrink considerably because you're now going to be competing with pure AI firms. And obviously your reputation, your relationships are important, but even those have a price tag associated with them. And at some point, there's going to be a shift. So it's not using AI is really just it's not a long-term strategy, and it's not something that you can withhold. You could conceivably still use a typewriter to do your work, and I think that would be pretty cool. But not using AI, given the amount of money with firms that are going to be pure AI, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if there's any firms out there that still use a typewriter in some capacity.
One of my partners had the most gorgeous typewriter in his office. There was a managing partner of the office in Irvine I had, and it was just this beautiful typewriter. I don't think he ever used it, but it was very cool.
Nice. All right. Well, let me change directions here a little bit. Let me talk about another stat that we found from the report that LawPro.ai did with Morgan & Morgan. It was that 61% of firms cite repetitive administrative tasks as their top operational challenge. And they found that to be something that they really wanted to fix using AI and using technology. And one of the things you do at Briefpoint, obviously, is helping with a big operational challenge, a big task in terms of discovery. And what I'd love to hear from you is, where do firms really tend to underestimate how much time a workflow is taking, like answering discovery, versus like when they actually go into the technology, how much time it's actually saving them? Does that make sense to you, what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we consider like sort of like heuristic biases and just biases in general, you likely overestimate the amount of time you do for something that you hate doing and underestimate the time you spend in things you like doing. So a really big pain point that I'm seeing is just like labeling documents and organizing documents. Like that does take a lot of time, and that can be really rote. But then if you really dig into it, it's kind of like a couple of hours of labeling, but it feels like forever. Responding to discovery is another one. I mean, I think the biggest underestimator, like the underestimated time component in my eyes, is finding old work product. It's kind of going through, you're like, oh, you know what? Like when you have them, like, oh, I've dealt with this situation before. And you realize you have, and you then go and try to find it. That often takes a lot more time than people think it does. So sort of going through old precedents and reusing, I think that's the most underestimated time. Overestimated time is like, labeling, tagging, and sorting and type of stuff.
Cool. All right, nice. Um, when we were talking about before, 92% of firms using AI, engaging in some form of AI, obviously that breaks all over the spectrum, right? It could be a firm just testing it out or trying to use it a little bit here and there, or it could be firms that have fully implemented it and integrated it into their law firm, trying to make themselves maybe even an AI law firm like what you mentioned before. So another key statistic that we found here was that from this report was that there's a big trust problem. And you mentioned this a little bit before, that if it's going to take you longer to make sure the data is correct than would have been just to do the thing in the first place, it doesn't make a lot of sense, which I fully agree with. So what we found from this report, surveying over 300 firms, 69% of personal injury law firms found that accuracy and errors were their top barrier in terms of fully integrating AI into their law firm. And I can say, just in terms of a couple of things that LawPro.ai does is, I always say to people, when you're using AI, it's important that the AI shows its work in terms of that you can verify things with just a click of a button to see where it got the information from. And we've also created hallucination prevention technology that's currently patent pending to also help go through before it goes to the end user to make sure to autocorrect or change things that doesn't look right. So those are some steps that we've taken at LawPro because we know this is such a concern, and it should be, right? These are lawyers' licenses on the line, and these are real clients that have been injured or hurt and need the max recovery and the proper justice. So they shouldn't demand any less. But those are some of the things that we have done at LawPro to help ensure that data is accurate and correct and that they're getting proper information. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly things you can do to combat hallucination risk. AI is just by background. They are not tied to the truth. They were trained based on reinforcement learning, human feedback. They were basically trained on people giving a thumbs up to their response or a thumbs down. And if you give a thumbs up to their response, they recalibrated to make that type of response more common. If you thumbs down, the opposite would be true. These things are hardwired into human psychology because they use that process billions and billions and billions of times, and they are designed to give you text that is most likely to receive a positive reaction from you. In that vein, those hallucinations could be a problem because the hallucinations are the attempt to construct text that you find appealing. So the more you need a case to stand for something, the more likely it is to be a hallucinated case. So definitely want to check your biases there. If you have a sort of mundane statement of law as part of a preliminary statement, that's probably not going to be hallucinated. AI is better at citations than it's ever been before. But when you get into the actual substantive stuff and the material things, like, you should definitely be checking your work. One thing, by the way, to do to check work with AI, have it give you a direct quote from the source that it found the information. So you can just do a Control-C, Control-F, Control-V to search for that word and make sure it's pulling from the right sources. With Briefpoint, we show you those sources. We actually show you our work. We create a map. Like, so for example, when we do RFP response generation, you can upload the entire case file, upload opposing counsel's request for production, and we go through every RFP. We find all the documents responsive to each. We group them by that. We Bates number them and cite them by their Bates range. Well, when you initially click it, we say, hey, we found 500 documents responsive to this request. We don't want you to take our word for it. So we have a big verify button. You click verify, and we actually show you exactly all the steps that our AI took, where we show categories of documents that the AI found responsive, and critically, ones we didn't find responsive. So instead of doing an exhaustive document review, you can verify at a glance, because verifying at a glance takes less time than reading the documents. So those verification procedures are great. You can sort of get there by the manual sort of rigor, and it sort of gets close to a full review just out of the box. But when you're actually in a production environment, like, having that clear picture of the work is very, very important to combat the time you spend verifying.
Yeah, great. I think that's all really helpful and great information and spot on. I'd also like to talk about a little bit further in terms of what it's looking like financially for a law firm in terms of what their spend is on AI adoption. So another statistic that we found in the report with Morgan & Morgan was that over 14% or about 14% of personal injury law firms are spending more than $50,000 a year on AI. And as you mentioned before, at a time when, there's private equity money getting involved in purchasing law firms, your EBITDA is more important than ever. And so I think something that I take from this is, when you're looking to get a solution, it's not a nice to have solution, right? It's not like it's fun to have. You're not spending those kinds of dollars on those kinds of solutions. You need to spend those kinds of solutions on things that are game changers, meaning they're going to shorten time on desk, increase revenue, make your employees handle more cases, more volume, provide a better service to your clients, right? They need to provide something, some kind of an ROI metric. How do you think about that?
Well, I mean, there's a common trope where it's like, hey, save more time, take on more cases, right? That only works if you can get more cases. So if you're someone that like are maxed out and like your top of funnel is pretty static and you're not willing to address getting new clients as a top of funnel acquisition process, and you're not able to actually capitalize on the AI, then the AI is just giving you more vacation days, which is fine. But if you really want to spend that kind of money, you need to make sure that you have a really solid top of funnel. You need to make sure that you're using AI also for client acquisition and other types of sort of revenue generating activities. That said, I think most people likely have plenty of cases that they don't take just because juice wasn't worth the squeeze before AI. And there's plenty of things like, Justice HQ has an attorney share program. There's plenty of places you can go to find those cases. And I think what we're going to find is that attorneys are going to be able to take cases that they normally wouldn't, and the cost to them is going to be less. So they can take on more cases, and they're basically lowering the risk. And it's just a simple calculation. If it normally costs you $50,000 to run a case, this is purely hypothetical, then any case that was valued at less than $50,000, you shouldn't take because you're going to lose money on it, right? If you have a $100,000 case, then you need at least a 50% chance of winning that. So with AI, if you can get the cost down to 20K, now you can take a 100K case that has a 20% chance of winning. And what that means is that you're going to be taking on harder cases. And if you're taking on harder cases, you're going to be a better attorney and you're going to win some of those. And it's going to be absolutely amazing. And I think that it's not necessarily going to make work easier because you're going to be taking on more difficult cases, but it's going to make for better attorneys. And you're going to see a lot of long-term benefits from just learning how to win those hard cases. So now that 20% is a 50%.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's funny. I just finished a case last week, settled a case 2 months before the jury trial was supposed to start. And it was a case where my law firm, the partners, we got together and the attorneys, and we took a vote if we were going to keep this case or not, because very difficult case, against a big company, and big liability issues, big damage issues, a lot of concerns, a lot of red flags, and frankly, I got outvoted. My firm decided that we weren't going to take the case. As a partner in the office, I decided we were going to take the case, and we took it anyways. And we just got it settled for a nice amount of money. My client was very, very happy, against a large corporation on a case that maybe a couple years earlier wouldn't have taken because there were so many issues and so many problems. So to your exact point, but I said, hey guys, nowadays, there's thousands of pages of medical records, no problem. That's not a constraint for us, and it's not going to take up anyone's time. And yes, it's going to be risky, and we're going to have to put money in the case, but it's not going to take our employees' time like it would have before. So we can take the risk on this case. And it went and I'm very happy for my client that we were able to get her justice and help her with her injuries, because we were able to take, and this is a case that was turned down from many law firms before she came to us. And that's always a red flag, of course. And all my partners and the lawyers in my office, they saw that red flag and they're like, oh no, we're sticking away. And we took it, we went forward with it, and really proud with the result we got, which I think speaks to exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And like to your point, like a lot of times it's not that the chance of success is low. It's that we don't have enough information to actually determine the chances of success until we're in discovery. And so if you can reduce your costs through discovery, then you're in a really good position to take on those cases that are normally pretty scary just because you're like, okay, well, we have this red flag, but then, it depends if this is a killer depending on X, Y, and Z, and those X, Y, and Z's might be information that opposing party has that you don't have access to. And in that situation, you're like, all right, do we really want to spend all the way through discovery to figure this out? And if you can make that early litigation process as efficient as possible, where you're automating that medical records, the complaint generation, demand letter generation, obviously discovery as well. If that's all automated and you have a system for that, you can get to that discovery really quickly and then either go for the settlement or go for gold. And that's a much better position to evaluate case risk than an intake form that has been passed through 20 different law firms and rejected.
For sure. No question about that. So I want to talk a little bit further. And we talked about this a little bit at the beginning. I want to talk a little bit more about what good implementation looks like, because I hear from firms all the time. I hear from firms that have not gotten fully integrated with AI yet saying, what's the implementation look like? And I talk to firms that have, big firms that have tried to implement AI and it was just a disaster. And I'll give you a couple of thoughts that I have, and then love to hear your thoughts about this as well. For me, it's a couple of things. Number one, I think when you're implementing AI or new technology, people right now are so concerned that they could lose their job from it. That like, this is going to come in, take over my job. I don't want it. I don't want to see it. It shouldn't be here. And one thing I know that we do in our office is we want to show our vision of like, this is the new technology or AI that we're bringing into our law firm. Here's why we're bringing it in. Here's how it's going to help our clients. Our clients always come first, right? We're a service-based industry. So anything we can do to help our clients, we're going to do. And this does not mean your job's going away. Here's our vision. Here's what your job will become. And in my office, the job has become something that's more of a skill job, meaning you're not just reading pages of records all day. You're really focused on the clients, having conversation with the clients and speaking to the clients and providing services to the client. So I think showing that vision to your law firm, to your employees is really incredible and important. And I think the second part of it is, and I hear this all the time, is especially when law firms use really expensive vendors, they say, well, I'm going to use you on this one, but I'm not going to use you on this one. We might use you on this one. It becomes complicated, right? Because you don't know exactly when to use the vendor or not. And it's really hard to integrate that. But if you can use a one point in time solution, that's helping you with your medical records, helping you with your discovery, and it's reasonable, the cost is reasonable, that you can say, hey guys, use this on every case. It makes the integration implementation that much easier. So I'd love to get what your thoughts are on providing good implementation for a law firm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to echo your point, having a clear rule set of AI usage where if X situation occurs, use AI is really useful just because AI can allegedly do everything, right? And if you get sort of decision paralysis, if you're just working through your day, and it's almost easier, instead of deciding what to use AI for, to just do the old way that you were already doing it. You're like, I don't need to mess around with that. And if you do it, you're like, not sure if it's going to work. So having we're going to use AI for this thing. So when this thing happens, do X, Y, and Z. Having a process. It's the process and the people need to be aligned. So you need to say, okay, we're going to do it this way. We're going to go a demo. We're going to do a training. And then let's work through with the vendor through your first use case with the vendor's tool. You should share your screen and work through it. And that's how you develop those policies. Learning best practices early on, finding one use case to start. If you've never used AI before, I think one of the best uses for it right now is actually to test your arguments. So this is a little bit of a digression, but like some practical advice. If you're looking to get started, AIs are sycophantic, where again, they're designed to give you text that you like. So if you say, hey, here's my brief, let me know what you think about it, it's going to say, hey, this is, we have some really strong points in here and blah, 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 blah. That is minimally useful. What you want to do instead is say, upload your own brief and pretend to be opposing counsel and tell AI that you are opposing counsel and say, hey, my opposing counsel sent me this brief, which is your brief. Give me my best arguments against it, highlight the inadequacies. And the AI is going to think that you are, the opposing counsel, and then really give you some great data on how to attack your argument. And the side effect of that is if your opposing counsel is using AI, you're already getting access to what they're likely going to say ahead of time. because you're using the same systems that they would to evaluate this if they are. As far as the implementation goes, again, start small, start with one use case. Get people that have the immediate pain point. So wait for a real life situation to a real case situation to occur where you say, hey, I have a bunch of medical records. That is your moment. Use the medical record AI for that. Learn, have the vendor hop on the call with you so you can develop those best practices early on, and then evaluate at the end. Okay, is this something that I would want to use again? And if so, let's start building these processes. But it starts with the people and aligning everyone and agreeing if we're going to use AI, we're going to use it in this situation. And really creating those specific rules early on is going to go a very long way, because when you hire a new person, you say, okay, hey, this is my firm, this is how we do X, this is how we do Y. When we get to situation Z, we use AI, right? We use this platform for this solution. And now you're starting to develop these automated practices that are being supported and furthering your firm's entire team and their sort of practice methodology.
Yeah, I think that's all really great information. I agree with all of it. I love the idea of putting in your own brief, pretending like you're opposing counsel. And what I do often, we have a lot of clients that do this, is they will take a little bit different than what you said, but they'll take the defense expert's medical record and report, and they will put together cross-examination questions directly based on the defense expert's report, because LawPro can give you all those questions based on what the expert didn't include in his report that should have been included, or what was missing, and how best to cross-examine. And I've heard great stories from a number of our users, how they've crushed different doctors on a cross-examination of a defense medical expert and been able to have huge change in the valuation of the case. So I love that thought. I love that idea. Do you have a couple minutes for questions?
Yes.
Okay. The time has flown by here. We'll just take a couple of questions that we have here, and then we'll get out of here. But let me ask you the first question. What do you think are some good questions to ask a vendor before committing to a contract?
So I think number one is support. So you say, okay, well, number one is security, right? You want zero data retention. You want SOC 2, Type 2 certified. You want them to have a BAA that they can send you a data use agreement or a data retention policy. Those types of things they should have templates of. If they don't, that's a problem. If the vendor has I've seen this before, they have a SOC 2 certified logo on their website, and then you ask them about it and they'll say, oh, it's pending. That's a bad sign. Now, SOC 2 Type 2 is not a guarantee by any means. It's kind of like, there was a study that found that parents who bought books on how to parent ultimately had healthier kids in like the long run due to some metrics. And so the instinct is to say, oh, well, the books made them better parents. But there's no actual causal relation there. It was actually the types of people that would buy parenting books were just better parents. In the same sense, yes, SOC 2 is not a guarantee. Every single one of the biggest, most popular hacks and data breaches in the recent history, all of those companies were SOC 2 compliant, right? It is more that if you have a company that has invested the amount of time and energy to become SOC 2 certified, they take security way more seriously, and it's just much like you can trust that they are actively invested in securing your data. Zero data retention is also a critical component. You don't want your AI to be training their systems, because those systems will then leach into the functionalities of other law firms and potentially opposing counsel. So you need to make sure there's a zero data retention policy. Moving from there, then I think support is another critical one. You need to make sure that you're able to contact people, because again, AI is not 100% accurate. There's things that are going to go wrong, and the vendors likely understand when these things go wrong, and you need to make sure that you're able to talk to someone so that they can fix it, because they likely know how to fix it. And then number three, the training. So training goes along with support. So it's, I guess, sort of 2.5 here. You need to make sure that the vendor will offer training, and that if you hire a new person, you can trust the vendor, to train that person and make sure they're up to date, so that you can sort of carry along. And Briefpoint does all of these. So all of those things, I wouldn't be saying them if they didn't, but those are a lot of good things to look out for.
Absolutely. And one thing I tell every potential customer, new customer, is lawpro.ai. First of all, we have all the security that you mentioned, but secondly, that unlimited training, unlimited implementation, integration. A law firm hires a new person and they want them to get, brought into the system and understand LawPro. We'll do the training for that law firm. And we have unlimited, every client has a customer success person, and we'll help them in any way they need with any implementation integrations. Whenever we have a new tool comes out, we send an email out to all of our users and offer to get on Zoom calls with them to further, integrate this and implement this and best practices. So I think that's really important. Do we have time for one more question or no?
Yeah, I can do one more.
Okay, let's do one more question. What do you think is the most common reason you hear of people not wanting to buy legal tech in general?
Oh, the legal tech in general. I mean, I've been in legal tech for 10 years now, and we've always been fighting against the status quo. And I think what I see, the biggest friction is something that I pointed to earlier, where, for example, we had there was a paralegal that had been in this firm for 30 years, and she did discovery this exact way, and it's the only way they did it, even though that process, it was like, labeling documents in a certain way and organizing it, even though that didn't have like a meaningful impact on the outcome of the case, it had a meaningful impact on their processes. And so they really needed a solution that matched their processes exactly. No horizontal solution was going to get there. And they really just, they needed something that worked for their practice. They had such deeply entrenched practices and policies for the way they did things that they couldn't risk shifting around. So, and that's totally, again, that's totally understandable. That's really the biggest thing, where if the AI is going to change how you work, it's probably not going to be very popular at your firm. I always say the best change management is no change at all. So if you're a vendor and you're evaluating vendors, like really think about how you would need to change your practice to make this work, and understand that that's going to need to be done all of the time unless you want to change your practice, which is a tougher choice.
Cool, great. Well, Nathan, this has been great being on here with you. Really appreciate it. Time flies. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Oh yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Nathan Walter. You can email Briefpoint by going to, or nwalter@briefpoint.ai is my email if you want to shoot me an email. We also have a support function. If you want to learn more about Briefpoint, just go to briefpoint.com and click Get Started. Put some time on our calendar and we'll talk to you about it.
Great. And best way to get in touch with me is my email, josh@lawpro.ai. If you want to go to our website, it's lawpro.ai. And if you want to get the Morgan report that we referenced here a couple of times, feel free to email me. It's free. Happy to send it out to anybody that wants it. Thank you, Nathan, again for joining me on this. This has been great, and I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.